My name is Chloe, and at 28 years old, I found myself standing on the precipice of the sweetest, most terrifying moment of my life, about to walk into a boardroom to face the man who had spent nearly 3 decades telling me I was fundamentally broken. This man was my father, Alistair Sterling, a titan of venture capital, and he was waiting inside, completely unaware that the founder of the billion-dollar tech unicorn he was about to court was his own daughter. He had no idea that the emotional girl he'd dismissed his whole life had built an empire not in spite of her sensitivity, but because of it. It's a strange feeling when your greatest wound becomes your most powerful weapon. Before I dive into this story of how a lifetime of being called too sensitive led to the showdown that would change our family forever, I'd love it if you let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever been underestimated or had your greatest strengths treated like weaknesses, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of people who believe in turning pain into power. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about a tech app. It's about reclaiming your own value when the person who should believe in you the most believes in you the least. My father's world was forged from steel and glass, both in the architecture of his office and the philosophy of his life. He lived by numbers, by market caps and burn rates and brutal, unsentimental logic. Feelings were a rounding error in the grand calculation of success. I, on the other hand, was born into a world of texture and color, of emotions that felt as real and as tangible as the ground beneath my feet. From my earliest memories, this difference between us was not a point of interest, but a source of friction. He loved me, I suppose, in the way a collector loves a beautiful but flawed piece of art. He saw potential, but it was constantly marred by what he called my hypersensitivity. My mother, Eleanor, had been the same. She was a watercolor artist who saw stories in the shapes of clouds and felt the moods of a room like a change in atmospheric pressure. I remember him watching her paint, a fond but pitying smile on his face. "Such a lovely hobby, Ellie," he'd say, the subtext hanging in the air. Asterisk cute but not real work. Not a real contribution. Asterisk after she passed away from a sudden illness when I was 16, that pitying gaze turned its full force on me. It was as if he saw her ghost in my every tear, her impracticality in my every passion. I remember my 10th grade science fair with a clarity that still stings. While my peers built baking soda volcanoes and potato clocks, I had poured my heart into a project on social mimicry in peer groups. I'd spent months observing, taking meticulous notes, creating charts that mapped how unspoken emotions rippled through the cafeteria. I was fascinated by the invisible currents that connect people. I presented it to him with a heart full of hope, my blue ribbon clutched in my hand. He scanned my carefully constructed presentation board, his brow furrowed. "Social mimicry. Chloe, this is soft. Where's the engineering? The hard data? Your cousin David is building a functional drone. That's the future." He patted my shoulder, a gesture meant to be comforting that felt like a dismissal. "You have a good heart. Maybe you should focus that on things that help people, like a charity." The blue ribbon felt like a token of participation in a game I was destined to lose. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. When I won a regional award for a short story in my senior year, he congratulated my brother Liam, in the same breath, for getting a summer internship at a bank. "Liam's setting himself up for the real world," he'd announced at a family dinner, raising a glass. "And Chloe wrote another nice story." The praise was always qualified, the encouragement always a redirect towards something less ambitious, less serious, less me. He wasn't a monster, he was worse. He was a pragmatist who genuinely believed he was protecting me from a world that would chew me up and spit me out. He saw my empathy not as a form of intelligence, but as a lack of armor. Every choice I made, from majoring in psychology and sociology to taking a job in user experience at a mid-level tech company, was met with that same sigh, that same look of gentle disappointment. "User experience," he had mused when I told him. "So you talk to people about their feelings about software. It's a start, I suppose. Try to get into product management. That's where the real decisions are made." His approval was a horizon I could sail towards forever but never reach, because every time I got close, he would move it further away, always keeping it just beyond the shores of who I was. My job at Innovatech was, for a time, a fragile peace treaty with my father's worldview. It was tech, a world he respected. I was good at my job, maybe too good. I wasn't just collecting user feedback, I was absorbing it. I felt the frustration of a user trying to navigate a confusing interface, the anxiety of someone unable to find a crucial feature. I would bring these stories, these feelings, into product meetings, my voice full of an urgency that my colleagues mistook for fragility. My boss, Mark, was a man cut from the same cloth as my father. He valued disruption, aggression, and moving fast, even if it meant breaking things or people. He saw my detailed reports on user emotional states as bottlenecks. "Chloe," he said one Tuesday afternoon, calling me into his glass-walled office. The view of the city was stark and impressive, a landscape of concrete and ambition that suddenly felt alien and hostile. "We need to talk about your approach." I sat down, my hands clasped in my lap, a familiar knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Is this about the feedback from the beta on the new dashboard?" Yes. I know the report was long, but I felt it was important to capture the nuances of user frustration. "People feel like we're not listening." Mark leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. It was a pose I'd seen my father adopt 1,000 times. It was the posture of someone about to deliver a difficult, but in their mind, necessary truth. "That's just it, Chloe. Nuance. You get bogged down in it. You get invested. We need to be clinical. We're building a product, not running a therapy group." His words were calm, measured, and each one felt like a small, sharp stone striking a bruise I'd carried my whole life. He continued, his voice taking on a tone of synthetic sympathy. "You're a wonderful person. Everyone here likes you. But this is a high-pressure environment. It requires a certain killer instinct, detachment. And to be frank, you're just too sensitive for this role." There it was. The word. The brand that had been seared onto my identity since childhood. Too sensitive. It wasn't an observation anymore. It was a verdict. It was the reason for my execution. He slid a folder across the polished desk. It was my termination paperwork. "We're letting you go," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "We've decided to go in a different direction with the UX team. Someone with a more data-driven mindset." The irony was staggering. My entire job was about collecting data, the messy, complicated human data that algorithms couldn't capture. But to him it didn't count. "I think you'd be happier somewhere you can leverage your natural empathy," he added, as if he were doing me a favor. "A non-profit, maybe. Or human resources." It was a carbon copy of my father's advice, a neatly packaged dismissal of my professional ambitions. I walked out of that office in a daze, clutching a cardboard box with a dying desk plant and a handful of personal effects. The city skyline mocked me through the lobby windows, a monument to a world I wasn't built to inhabit. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too numb, too hollowed out by the chillingly familiar echo of my father's voice in my boss's mouth. Driving home, my hands were trembling so hard I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The numbness was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, creeping wave of humiliation and despair. My first instinct, a deeply ingrained reflex, was to call my father. A part of me, a foolish, eternally hopeful part, thought that maybe this time would be different. Maybe the shock of me being fired would crack through his pragmatic shell and he would offer some genuine comfort. I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine idling, and dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice crisp and impatient. "Chloe, I'm about to step into a meeting. Is this important?" I got fired," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched for an eternity. I could hear the faint murmur of voices in the background, the clinking of a coffee cup. He was already somewhere else. "Fired," he finally said. His voice laced not with sympathy, but with a weary, predictable disappointment. Innovatech. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. The blow was so direct, so devoid of comfort, that it stole the air from my lungs. What? Why would you say that? Asked, my voice cracking. Because, Chloe, this is exactly what I've been telling you for years, he said, his tone shifting from impatient to lecturing. The real world, the competitive world, it eats sensitive people alive. You can't survive in that ecosystem. You take everything personally. You feel too much. This was inevitable. Every word was a confirmation of my deepest fears about myself. That I was inadequate. That I was fundamentally unsuited for the life I wanted. I was good at my job, I protested weakly. They said my empathy was a problem. Of course it's a problem, he shot back, his voice rising in frustration. Empathy doesn't scale, Chloe. It doesn't close deals. It doesn't build empires. It's a liability. I squeezed my eyes shut, leaning my forehead against the cold glass of the car window. I had called him for a lifeline, and he had handed me an anchor. Listen, he said, his tone softening into the patronizing calm he used when he was about to give what he considered sage advice. This is a good thing. A learning experience. It will force you to recalibrate. My firm funds a very worthy literacy charity for underprivileged kids. Their director owes me a favor. I could make a call, get you an administrative position. It's quiet, low stress. Something more, your speed. The insult was so profound, so deeply dismissive of everything I was and everything I wanted to be, that it snapped me out of my despair and into a cold, sharp-edged anger. He wasn't just telling me I couldn't succeed in his world. He was trying to relegate me to a footnote in his, a charity case he could point to for good PR. No, I said, my voice suddenly firm. No, thank you, Dad. Don't be proud, Chloe, he sighed. There's no shame in finding your proper place. My proper place isn't as your pet project, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. I have to go. I hung up before he could respond, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat in the car for a long time, the silence of the phone more damning than his words. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. But as the tears finally started to fall, hot and bitter, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. What if he was right? I didn't go home. I couldn't face the empty apartment and the box of my failed career. Instead, I drove to Maya's place. Maya was my chosen family, a brilliant, fiercely loyal graphic designer I'd known since college. She was the yin to my yang, all sharp lines and bold colors to my softer, more muted palette. She opened the door before I even knocked, took one look at my face and the box in my arms, and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. He's an idiot, she said, her voice muffled in my hair. She didn't even need to ask who he was. We sat on her worn-out sofa, surrounded by her chaotic collection of art books and half-finished canvases, and I told her everything. I told her about Mark's speech, the echoes of my father, and the devastating phone call. I laid out all the evidence for the prosecution, the case for my own fundamental inadequacy. Maya listened patiently, her expression growing stormier with every word I spoke. When I was finished, my voice raw and hoarse, she didn't offer platitudes. She got angry on my behalf. A liability. Your sensitivity is a liability. She fumed, pacing her small living room. Are they insane? Chloe, your empathy is your superpower. It's what makes you an incredible friend. It's what made you the best damn UX person Innovatech will ever have. Those idiots just didn't know how to use you. She stopped pacing and knelt in front of me, her eyes boring into mine. Do not let those two emotionally stunted capitalists define you. Their world is black and white, all ones and zeros. You see the entire spectrum in between. That's not a weakness, Chloe. It's a higher resolution of reality. Her words were a bomb on a raw wound. She was reframing my entire narrative, not by denying the core trait, but by celebrating it. She ordered a giant pizza, put on our favorite sad movie, and let me cry it out. She didn't try to fix it. She just sat with me in the wreckage, a silent, solid presence that said, "You are not alone, and you are not broken." Later that night, long after Maya had gone to bed, I was scrolling mindlessly through the App Store on my phone, my thumb swiping past a dozen different wellness and mental health apps. They were all so sterile, so clinical. They had habit trackers, guided meditations with soothing, generic voices, and articles about optimizing your mental state. They felt like they were designed by people like Mark and my father. They were trying to fix a problem, to streamline a human being, to make them more efficient. They offered solutions but no solace. They offered data but no dignity. And in that moment, staring at the cold, impersonal glow of the screen, the anger Maya had stoked in me began to curdle into an idea. A spark ignited in the hollow space inside me. What if an app didn't try to fix you? What if it just listened? I remembered the user feedback I'd fought so hard for at Innovatech. The lonely people, the anxious people, the people who just wanted to feel seen. What if AI, the very technology my father worshipped for its cold logic, could be trained on a different dataset? Not just on facts and figures, but on empathy. On poetry, on philosophical texts. On anonymized transcripts of truly therapeutic conversations. What if I could build an AI that didn't give advice, but asked thoughtful questions? An AI that could learn to validate feelings, to reflect a user's emotional state back to them with compassion, to create a space of non-judgmental presence. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. It was the exact opposite of everything my father and my former boss believed in. It was a business model based on the very thing they called a liability. I grabbed a notebook from my bag, the pen scratching furiously across the page. I wrote a single word at the top, aura. The project wasn't just a concept anymore. It was a mission. It was my answer to their world. The next morning, bleary-eyed but buzzing with a purpose I hadn't felt in years, I did something brave. I looked through my old university contacts and found the email for Dr. Anya Sharma. She had been my thesis advisor, a brilliant professor of ethics and artificial intelligence. Unlike my father, she had seen my fascination with the human element of technology not as a distraction, but as the entire point. Her classes were the only place I'd ever felt my sensitivity was an academic asset. I spent hours crafting the email, trying to articulate the chaotic storm of ideas in my head into something coherent and compelling. I explained my vision for Aura, an empathetic AI, a digital sanctuary. I was half expecting no reply, or a polite academic brush-off. To my astonishment, she responded within the hour. "Chloe, this is fascinating. The Valley is obsessed with making AI more intelligent, but you're focused on making it wiser. I have office hours this afternoon. Can you come to campus?" Walking into her office was like stepping into a different dimension. It was crammed with books, not on coding languages, but on philosophy, ethics, and cognitive science. Dr. Sharma, with her warm eyes and sharp, inquisitive mind, greeted me not with pity, but with intellectual curiosity. I poured out the entire concept, my voice gaining confidence as I spoke. She listened intently, nodding, asking probing questions that sharpened my ideas rather than blunting them. "The main challenge won't be the technology, Chloe," she said, leaning forward. "The core chatbot architecture is straightforward. The challenge will be the dataset, the soul of the machine. How do you teach it empathy without making it manipulative? How do you ensure it provides comfort without creating dependence?" She was seeing the real problems, the deep, important problems. She was taking it seriously. "This is radical," she concluded, a slow smile spreading across her face. "And it's necessary. The world needs more of this. It needs more of you." She offered to be an official advisor to the project, to connect me with a few of her most promising former students for technical help, and to give me access to university research databases. I walked out of that office feeling like I was floating. I had been fired, belittled, and dismissed. But in the span of 24 hours, I had found an ally, a mentor, and a mission. I had lost a job, but I was about to build a legacy, and I would do it my way. The next 18 months were a blur of caffeine, code, and conviction. My life shrank to the size of a tiny one-bedroom apartment I could barely afford after cashing out the meager 401k from my old job. The change was brutal. I went from a comfortable corporate salary to a diet that consisted primarily of instant noodles and cheap coffee. My father, hearing through my brother Liam that I'd moved, had called once. "Still job hunting, I hear," he'd said, the unspoken "I told you so" hanging heavy in the line. "The offer for the charity position still stands, Chloe. There's no shame in taking it." I'd politely declined, telling him I was working on a personal project. He didn't ask what it was. The dismissal, for once, was a blessing. It gave me the cover I needed. On every legal document, every registration form, every email signature, I was not Chloe Sterling. I was Chloe Vance, using my mother's maiden name. It was partly for anonymity, a way to build this thing outside the long shadow of my father's world. But mostly, it felt like an act of quiet rebellion, a way to honor the legacy of the woman he had also deemed too sensitive. Maya was my rock. She took on the role of co-founder with a fierce passion, working on Aura's branding and user interface after her own long days at a soulless advertising agency. My tiny living room became our headquarters. It was a chaotic mess of whiteboards covered in flowcharts, empty pizza boxes, and laptops connected by a spiderweb of charging cables. I was the architect of Aura's mind, and she was the architect of its soul. While I spent thousands of hours training the AI, feeding it a carefully curated diet of Stoic philosophy, humanist psychology, poetry by Mary Oliver, and anonymized, consent-driven therapeutic dialogues, Maya was designing an interface that felt like a warm hug. She chose a palette of soft, calming colors, designed a logo that looked like a gentle, pulsing light, and obsessed over every font and button to ensure the user experience was intuitive and comforting. There were nights we worked until 3 a.m., fueled by a shared, crazy belief in what we were building. We'd celebrate small victories. The first time the AI responded to a user's expression of sadness with a perfectly phrased, non-judgmental question. The day the app compiled without a single error, with a high five and another pot of coffee. We were exhausted, broke, and happier than I had ever been. It wasn't a smooth, heroic climb. There were moments of gut-wrenching despair that made me question everything. One night, a power surge fried my external hard drive, wiping out a week's worth of crucial code and AI training data. I just sat on the floor and stared at the wall for an hour, utterly defeated. Maya found me like that, put a blanket around my shoulders, and ordered a new hard drive on her credit card without a word. The deepest cut, however, came from a man who was an old acquaintance of my father. I'd scraped together the courage to pitch our concept to him for a small seed investment, hoping to get enough money to afford better servers. We met at a sterile upscale coffee shop. He listened to my passionate pitch about empathetic AI, a smug little smile on his face the entire time. When I finished, he let out a short, barking laugh. "An app that's nice to you," he sneered, stirring his espresso. "Sweetheart, that's not a business, that's a teddy bear. The market wants to be disrupted, not coddled. Good luck with your little feelings project." He left a $10 bill on the table for our coffees and walked out, leaving me stinging with a humiliation that felt sickeningly familiar. That night, I came closer to quitting than ever before. The weight of the world, of my father's voice, of that investor's sneer, felt crushing. I found myself scrolling through job listings for project managers, for UX designers, for anything sensible that would give me a steady paycheck and an escape from this impossible dream. My cursor hovered over the apply button for a position at a bland, stable insurance company. Maya walked into the room, saw the look on my face and the job posting on my screen. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice soft but firm. She closed my laptop. "What he said doesn't matter. What your father says doesn't matter. What do our beta testers say?" She was right. We had a small, closed group of 100 beta testers, people from online support forums who had agreed to try the early versions of Aura. Their feedback was our North Star. I opened the feedback file and we spent the next hour reading their comments aloud. I've never felt so heard. This is the first time I've been able to talk about my anxiety without feeling judged. I was having a panic attack at 2 a.m., and Aura talked me through it. It saved me. With every comment, the armor around my heart grew a little thicker. The investor was wrong. My father was wrong. There was a market for empathy. It was just a market they were too blind to see. We launched Aura on the App Stores 6 months later with all the fanfare of a whisper in a hurricane. We had no marketing budget, no PR team, no launch party. It was just me and Maya, sitting in my living room, watching the download counter tick from 0 to 1, then to 2, then to 10. For the first few weeks, it was a slow, quiet trickle. The users were finding us through word of mouth, through small mentions in niche online communities. The reviews started to come in, and they were intensely personal, almost confessional. They weren't 5-star ratings with a great app comment. They were paragraphs, sometimes pages long. A college student in Ohio wrote about how Aura helped her manage her social anxiety. A new father in the UK talked about using it in the middle of the night to cope with postpartum depression, something he felt too ashamed to talk to anyone else about. A veteran wrote a single powerful sentence. "It feels like someone is watching my 6." Each review was a vindication. Each story was a brick in the foundation of our new reality. The trickle became a stream, then a river. It started trending on Twitter, not because of any marketing push, but because users were organically sharing screenshots of their conversations with the app, marveling at its uncanny ability to be kind. Hashtag Aura app began to pop up everywhere. Then came the moment that changed everything. A massive influencer, a young woman famous for her brutally honest and vulnerable content about her own mental health struggles, discovered Aura. She posted a 20-minute, unedited video to her millions of followers. She was in tears for most of it. "I don't know who made this," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but it feels like they've been inside my head. It doesn't try to fix me. Just hold space for me. I think this app could save lives." The video went supernova. Our servers, housed on a budget hosting plan, nearly buckled under the strain. My phone started vibrating and didn't stop for 3 days. The download counter spun like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. 100,000. 500,000. A million. Suddenly we were the story. TechCrunch, Forbes, The Guardian. They all wanted to know about the mysterious new mental health app that had come out of nowhere and captured the hearts of millions. The empathetic AI. Is Aura the future of mental health? One headline screamed. The viral app built on kindness. With the explosion in users came the metrics my father would understand. Engagement was off the charts. User retention was higher than any social media platform. And because we had a pay-what-you-can subscription model, the revenue started pouring in. We were profitable within a month of going viral. And with profitability came the sharks. The venture capital firms started circling, sniffing around for the next big thing. They were all trying to find the founder, this enigmatic C. Vance, who had no digital footprint, no LinkedIn profile, no history in Silicon Valley. The secrecy that had once been my shield now became my mystique. One morning, while sifting through a mountain of emails, I saw a subject line that made my blood run cold. Series A Investment Inquiry. Sterling Venture Partners. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I opened it with a trembling hand. It was from a junior analyst, a young man named David Chen. The email was a masterpiece of corporate politeness. He wrote of his firm's deep admiration for what Aura had accomplished, how it had disrupted the wellness space, and how Sterling Venture Partners was uniquely positioned to help Aura scale its paradigm-shifting technology. They were extremely interested in leading a series of funding round and requested a meeting with the founder at their earliest convenience. I read the email 3 times. It was professional, flattering, and utterly, completely oblivious. They had no idea. My father's firm, the temple of cutthroat capitalism where empathy was a dirty word, was now begging for a piece of the company I had built from the ashes of their derision. I looked at Maya, who was reading over my shoulder, her eyes wide. She looked at me, and a slow, wicked grin spread across her face. "Well," she said, "this is going to be interesting." The days leading up to the meeting were a strange mix of terror and serene calm. Maya was a bundle of nerves, triple-checking our pitch deck, running financial models I didn't understand, and stress-baking an ungodly number of cookies. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked me for the 10th time the night before the meeting. We don't need their money. We could just say no. We were sitting on the floor of my apartment, which was still our office, though now it was littered with congratulatory flower arrangements from journalists and tech admirers. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a sense of profound stillness. The storm inside me had finally passed. I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. This isn't about money, Maya. Never was. I've been preparing for this meeting my whole life. I just didn't know what it was for. This wasn't about seeking his approval anymore. That ship had sailed, and I had watched it sink without regret. This was about closing a chapter. It was about showing him, not telling him, what the world looked like from my point of view. The next morning, I chose my outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle. I didn't pick a severe corporate power suit, the kind of armor the women at his firm wore. I chose a deep blue dress, professional and impeccably tailored, but made of a soft, flowing fabric. It was a statement. I could be strong without being hard. I put on the simple locket my mother had left me, its cool metal a comforting weight against my skin. As Maya and I went over the presentation one last time, she pointed to the title slide. Are you sure you want to leave this? She asked. The slide read, *Aura, a new paradigm in human-centered AI. Chloe Vance, CEO and founder. I'm sure, I said again. There would be no hiding, no softening the blow. The reveal had to be absolute. Walking into the lobby of Sterling Venture Partners was like stepping onto an alien planet I had only ever heard about in stories. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive leather and ambition. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and the silence was broken only by the hushed, important-sounding whispers of people in bespoke suits. It was the physical manifestation of my father's entire belief system. Cold, imposing, and brutally efficient. A young woman with a sleek headset and a practiced smile led us down a long hallway to the main conference room. She called it the Summit. Called it the Shark Tank. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears, but my hands were steady. I was no longer the girl hoping for a crumb of praise at the science fair. I was the CEO of a company that was, by their own firm's frantic estimates, valued at over $1 billion. The heavy glass door swung open. The room was dominated by a colossal mahogany table that seemed to absorb all the light. Seated around it were 6 partners, the Jedi Council of Venture Capital. And at the head of the table, the seat of ultimate power, was my father, Alistair Sterling. He was looking down, scanning a document. His silver hair perfectly coiffed. The junior analyst, David Chen, who had sent the email, stood nervously by his side. "Thank you for coming," my father began without looking up. His voice the familiar baritone of command. "We're very excited to hear what you have to say, Mr. Vance. We see tremendous potential in what you've built." He finally lifted his gaze from the paper, a welcoming, predatory smile already forming on his lips. And then he saw me. The smile didn't just vanish. It shattered. His face, a mask of calculated control I had known my entire life, completely fell apart. It was a rapid, horrifying sequence of emotions. First, a flicker of confusion, as if his brain was struggling to process an impossible data point. Then a wave of stark, undiluted shock that drained all the color from his skin, leaving him a ghastly shade of gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes, which had always held a look of either disappointment or detached authority when they looked at me, were now wide with utter, helpless disbelief. The other partners, sensing the sudden catastrophic shift in the room's atmosphere, looked from Alistair to me and back again, their own expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. The polished silence of the room was now thick with a tension so profound it was almost audible. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a reassuring smile. I walked calmly to the head of the table opposite him and placed my laptop down. I met his stunned gaze with a look of quiet, unwavering resolve. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and carrying easily through the silent room, "it's Ms. Vance. And you can call me Chloe." My name, hung in the air like a judgment. I turned to the presentation screen and clicked the remote. The title slide appeared, my name and title projected 10 feet high behind me. Chloe Vance, CEO and founder. I let it sink in. I let them all connect the dots. Then I began my pitch. But it wasn't the pitch they were expecting. I didn't open with market penetration or user acquisition costs. I opened with a story. There are over 8 billion people in the world, I began, my voice even and calm. And yet, an epidemic of loneliness is sweeping across the globe. We have never been more connected, and we have never felt more alone. Because connection isn't about data transfer. It's about being seen. I talked about the fundamental human need for validation, for a safe space to be vulnerable. I explained that Aura wasn't built on complex algorithms, but on a simple revolutionary premise. That empathy could be a feature. That sensitivity wasn't a bug. I could feel my father's eyes on me, but I didn't look at him. I addressed the entire board. I played them 3 audio clips, anonymous of course, from our users. The shaky voice of a teenager admitting he was scared. The exhausted sigh of a new mother feeling overwhelmed. The quiet gratitude of an elderly man who said Aura was the only person he spoke to all day. The raw, unfiltered humanity in those voices silenced any possible talk of metrics. It filled that cold, sterile room with something it had never contained before. Genuine feeling. Then I switched to the numbers. The explosive growth, the unprecedented user retention, the millions in profit. I laid out the data with the clinical precision my father had always admired, but I framed it all around our core mission. Our success, I concluded, is not because we built a better piece of technology. It's because we built a more human one. I finished, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, one of the partners, a sharp-looking woman named Evelyn Reed, spoke up, her eyes fixed on me with a look of pure respect. That was remarkable. She glanced at my father, who was still staring at me, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. Then Alistair found his voice. It was hoarse, a pale imitation of his usual confident tone. "Chloe," he croaked, shaking his head slightly. Why didn't you tell me you were doing this?" This was the moment. The question I had been waiting for my entire life. I turned my full attention to him, letting the other partners fade into the background. "Why didn't I tell you?" I repeated, my voice not angry, but filled with a sad, factual clarity. "Because for 28 years you have told me consistently and without fail that this part of me," I gestured to my heart, "my sensitivity, my empathy was a liability. A fatal flaw that would guarantee my failure in the real world." I paused, letting the weight of his own words settle on him. "But you were wrong. This part of me isn't a liability. It is the entire foundation of a billion-dollar company. A company that your firm, the firm that worships at the altar of ruthless logic, is now desperate to own a piece of. So the question, Dad, isn't why I didn't tell you. The question is, do you finally see me now?" The directness of the question, the quiet power behind it, seemed to physically knock the air out of him. He recoiled as if struck. Before he could formulate a response, Evelyn Reed spoke again, her voice crisp and decisive. "Alistair, with all due respect, this is irrelevant. Ms. Vance, your presentation was one of the most compelling I have ever seen. The founder, the product, the market position. It's flawless. Family dynamics aside, the numbers are undeniable. We need to put together a term sheet. Immediately." The power in the room had completed its tectonic shift. Alistair Sterling, the kingmaker, the titan, was no longer in control. He was just a father, stunned and silent, in a room where his dismissed daughter held every single card. I gave him one last look, not of triumph, but of a deep, sorrowful finality. The need for his approval had withered and died, and in its place was a calm, sad pity. I turned my attention back to Evelyn. "Thank you for the kind words, Ms. Reed. And thank you all for your time," I said, closing my laptop with a soft click. "But we're not seeking investment. We're fully profitable and self-funded. This meeting was simply a courtesy." I gathered my things, gave a polite nod to the stunned board, and walked out of that room, leaving my father speechless in the empire he had built, an empire that could no longer touch me. The moment the elevator doors closed, sealing us in a bubble of silence, Maya let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Chloe, that was epic." The look on his face. I leaned against the cool wall of the elevator, my own adrenaline starting to recede, leaving a profound and surprising emptiness in its wake. There was no elation, no surge of vengeful glee. Just quiet. "Let's get out of here," I said softly. We didn't go back to the apartment. We went to a quiet, ridiculously expensive restaurant that we never would have dreamed of affording a year ago. We ordered champagne. Maya was buzzing, recounting every detail of the meeting, the stunned faces of the partners, the perfect, devastating delivery of my final lines. I just listened, swirling the bubbles in my glass. Then, in the middle of her excited chatter, I started to cry. They weren't the hot, angry tears of humiliation I'd shed in my car after being fired. They were quiet, cleansing tears. It was the physical release of a burden I had carried on my shoulders for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "It's over," I whispered to Maya, who immediately stopped talking and just took my hand. The whole thing. The fight. The need for him to see me, to approve of me. It's just gone. It was a strange kind of grief. I was mourning the loss of an illusion. The illusion that one day my father would finally understand and validate me. The meeting hadn't given me his approval. It had shown me with absolute clarity that I had never needed it in the first place. My worth wasn't a stock to be evaluated in his boardroom. It was inherent. It was mine. A few days later, a sleek black car I recognized pulled up outside my humble apartment building. My father got out. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of the power of his corner office and his mahogany table. He looked old. He buzzed my apartment, and I answered over the intercom, my voice steady. "What do you want, Dad?" "Can I come up?" he asked. His voice was strained. "I just want to talk." I hesitated, then said, "You can talk from there." I went to my window and looked down at him standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. He looked up, and for the first time I saw not a titan of industry, but just a man lost and out of his depth. He tried to apologize. He fumbled with the words, his language still hopelessly tangled in the terminology of his world. I misjudged the market viability of empathy," he said, as if he were discussing a failed investment thesis. The absurdity of the statement gave me strength. "You didn't misjudge a market, Dad," I called down to him. "You misjudged your daughter." He flinched. He tried a different tactic, an old, familiar one. Manipulation dressed as fatherly concern. "I was only ever trying to make you stronger, Chloe. To prepare you for a tough world." The excuse, once so powerful, was now transparently hollow. "No," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You were trying to make me more like you. And I'm not. I'm like Mom. And I'm finally okay with that." He tried one last time. "What will people say? This is a mess for the family." "The only mess," I replied, was a father who couldn't see the value in his own child until she had $1 billion price tag attached to her. I saw the fight go out of him. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped. "What do you want from me, Chloe?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Right now," I said, taking a deep breath. "I want time. A lot of time. And I want you to know that if you ever want a real relationship with me, it will be on my terms. Not yours." I stepped back from the window, ending the conversation. I had finally set a boundary, a real one, and the world didn't end. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. It didn't take long for the story to leak. Silicon Valley runs on gossip as much as it does on code, and the tale of the meeting was too delicious to stay secret. A reporter from TechCrunch, who had been trying to land an interview with me for weeks, finally put the pieces together. The headline was brutal. The VC who passed on his own daughter's unicorn. The article painted my father as a relic, a symbol of an old, emotionally unintelligent guard being swept away by a new wave of human-centric tech. I became an unwilling icon overnight. I wasn't just Chloe Vance, the founder of Aura. I was Chloe Sterling, the daughter who had turned her father's greatest blind spot into her greatest victory. The narrative was powerful, and it took on a life of its own. I was invited to give keynote speeches, to write op-eds, to sit on panels about the future of ethical AI. The very sensitivity my father had spent a lifetime trying to suppress was now my brand, my superpower, celebrated on the world stage. It was a strange, dizzying irony. I had finally gotten everything I thought I wanted, only to realize it wasn't what I needed at all. A year passed. Aura continued to thrive, but my focus had shifted. We were more than just a successful company now. We were a movement. Using our profits, I launched the Aura Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing free, accessible mental health tools to underserved communities. High schools, veterans associations, and domestic violence shelters. It was the kind of work my father had once so condescendingly suggested for me, but now I was doing it on my own terms, funded by the success of the very liability he had scorned. My life was full. I had my work, my incredible team, Maya by my side, and a quiet, unshakable sense of my own worth. I was giving the closing keynote at a major tech conference in San Francisco. The topic was the ROI of empathy. As I spoke to a packed auditorium of thousands, I saw a familiar figure standing near the back of the room. It was my father. He wasn't in the VIP section, he wasn't networking. He was just standing by himself, his hands in his pockets, listening. He looked different. The hard, polished edges seemed to have worn away, leaving something more fragile and human behind. After the standing ovation, as I was making my way backstage, he approached me. He didn't try to talk business. He didn't make excuses. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a sad, quiet regret. "I'm proud of you, Chloe," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "Not for the money, not for the company, for who you are. Your mother, she would have been so proud of you." It was the first time he had mentioned my mother in a context of pure, unadulterated pride. It was the apology I had stopped waiting for, and its arrival was both heartbreaking and healing. I didn't know if this change was permanent, or if it was just the last-ditch effort of a man who realized he'd lost something priceless. And for the first time it didn't matter. I nodded, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. "Thank you, Dad," I said. It was a start. Maybe it would lead to a new kind of relationship, one built not on his expectations, but on mutual respect. Or maybe it wouldn't. But my peace was no longer contingent on that outcome. The ultimate vindication wasn't the look of shock on his face in that boardroom. It wasn't the billion-dollar valuation or the fawning magazine articles. It was the quiet, profound moment I realized I didn't need any of it to feel whole. My worth was never his to bestow. It had been inside me all along, waiting for me to be sensitive enough to my own needs to finally hear it. Looking back on it all now, the lesson is so clear. We spend so much of our lives letting other people write the code for our self-worth, especially the people we love. We let them define our strengths as weaknesses and our passions as impractical. But the most important project you will ever work on is yourself, and you are the only one who gets to define the terms of your own value. So my final advice is this. Listen to that quiet, sensitive voice inside you. It's not a flaw. It's your most accurate sensor. It is your guide. Don't let anyone, no matter how powerful or how loved, convince you to mute it. I'd love to hear from you now. Have you ever been underestimated or had a core part of your personality dismissed by others? Share your story in the comments below, because our experiences are what connect us. If my journey resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, who is struggling to be seen for who they truly are, please share this with them. Thank you for joining me on this journey and for listening to my story. Remember, sometimes the people who believe in you the least end up giving you the most powerful reason to believe in yourself. I wish you all the strength to honor your own truth.